Hello, my name is Katie and welcome to part 2 of my February 2021 wrap-up. I will link part 1 in the cards. I discussed some reading stats and then the nonfiction and the science fiction that I read in February. This video is going to focus on the historical fiction, the mystery thrillers, and then the one literary fiction book that I read in February. First off, my hair's a mess. I know, this has been acknowledged. Moving on. The first book I want to talk about is Catherine, The Great Journey by Kristiana Gregory. I've been reading the Royal Diary series off and on for a while now. I usually read 1, maybe 2 books every month. If you've been around for any length of time, you already know this. I don't think I rated this one, and not because it was bad, just because it was like really short and I just couldn't usually if I read these, I either have a rating in my head that I'm like, yeah, okay, I think this goes here, or I just can't think of how I would rate it, in which case I don't. This was pretty entertaining though. Maybe not my favorite in the series thus far, but I did enjoy my time with it. Next we have The Lost Queen by Signe Pike. I loved this. I gave this 5 stars. The blurb here says Outlander meets Camelot, and yeah, that's a pretty accurate descriptor. This book follows the lives of twins Langoreth and Lailoken. Lailoken is the person that the Merlin myth is supposed to be based off of, and so that does play kind of heavily into this. There's also a lot of discussion about the old ways with religion versus the new way, which was Christianity. This primarily follows Langoreth and her life, her falling in love, her getting married, her having children. This is book 1 in a trilogy, and oh my god, book 2 is already out, and I'm really tempted to just pick it up and read it now, but then I'm gonna have to wait for book 3. So I don't know what to do, but I remember I finished this and all I wanted was to like pick it back up again because I wanted to be in that world. There is a fantasy vibe to it, but it's very slight. This I would definitely say is more historical fiction than fantasy of any kind. Next up is A Long Petal of the Sea by Isabel Allende. Oh my god, I love this cover. Like, I'm trying to get the lights not to shine on it too bad, but I love this cover. I gave this book 4 stars. We start following this family during the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. They eventually immigrate to Chile, and then we kind of get to follow them through all the various political upheavals that Chile goes through up until I think about the 1990s is when the story ends. This was a beautiful story, and I really, really did love the characters. I will say though that it kind of feels like it's nonfiction at points, which was a little bit weird and definitely gave you the feel of just info dumping, which kind of detracted from my overall enjoyment of the story. That being said, I kind of understand because Isabel Allende is from Chile, and she said that in her acknowledgments that this is a fairly personal story to her because even though all these characters are fictional, they are based off of people that she knows, and she didn't really have to use her imagination with any of this. I do recommend it. It's just maybe not... If you don't read nonfiction at all, you might have a little bit of a hard time with it. Next up, we have The Book of Lost Names by Kristin Harmel. I went through a series of emotions with this book. I ended up settling on 3 stars because at the beginning, for like the first 100 pages, I hated this. Like, none of the dialogue felt real or natural. Basically what happens is that there's this family, they are Jewish. There's the father and the mother who were both born in Poland but immigrated to France. Their daughter Eva was born in France. They get taken away, except fortunately the mother and Eva were somewhere else at the time, so only her father actually gets taken by the Nazis. Well, I think it was actually the French police that picked them up, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, Eva manages to make this daring escape plan, which her father had kind of set up beforehand for her. He was nervous about the way things were happening, and so he gave her some ideas, like, you need to go talk to this person, this is what you need to do. He left them money and things of that nature. My problem... okay, so at the beginning, Ava's dialogue felt stilted and unnatural, and he didn't like it. Her mother is one of the most infuriating people that I know. Start to finish, I couldn't stand the woman. She just, like, has no idea how to, like, be flexible with things. And I understand she's going through a hard time, but, like, all she does is make Ava feel really bad about things and make her life harder. And it's like, what do you want? Like, this is the way the world is going right now, and I'm doing what I need to do to make us survive. And her mother's just so unappreciative all the time. And it just frustrated me. And then Eva, oh my gosh, she needs to shut up. And not like silencing women's voices, but no, like, she literally needs to shut up. She talks about these sensitive topics in, like, the middle of train stations. And this guy who's trying to help her is like, shh, like, you can't say this. This is how you get arrested. Man, she was frustrating. That person, however, his name was Remy, he saved the book. The dynamic between him and Ava was so good, and he brought this level of adventure and intrigue to the book that was missing otherwise. And that being said, this book never felt particularly high stakes, even though it is dealing with the French underground and forging documents for Jewish children, well, Jewish people in general, but specifically children. Never really got the super high stakes vibe that I would expect from something like that. And then I knew how it was going to end. Like, there were two things that happened near the end, and I had guessed both of them very early on. I mean, I still enjoyed my time with the book, but to me it just wasn't anything special, so I give it 3 stars. Alright, next up we have The Paying Guest by Sarah Waters. If you've been around for a while, you'll know I've been slowly but surely working my way through Sarah Waters novels. This, I think, is my favorite so far of all of them. It starts off a little bit faster than most of Sarah Waters' novels do. Her books usually start off very slow-paced, but this one never really felt slow-paced to me. You're following, it's post-World War I, and there's this woman and her mother, and they are living in their house together. It was a pretty prestigious home. However, now that both of her brothers have died in the war and her father died as well, they're having trouble making ends meet financially. So they take in boarders or paying guests, because paying guests sounds more high class, I guess. Anyway, the character dynamics were amazing. And Sarah Waters always does this to me. I always go in thinking I know how things are going to go down, and then that's not how they go down. And I don't even want to say what I mean, because it happens a good halfway through the book, and I was like, what now? Okay. But yeah, Sarah Waters is this thing where you feel like you know somebody, but then she's really good at casting doubt as to whether or not you do know them and what they're capable of. And, you know, once again, the atmosphere is just brilliant. I really can't recommend Sarah Waters highly enough. The last historical fiction novel I read was The Jane Austen Society by Natalie Jenner. I gave this 2 stars, although to be honest, the more I think about it, the more I think that maybe I should have given it 1 star. I hated this. I hated this. I described it to a friend as a book for Jane Austen sycophants written by a woman who wishes she could write as compellingly as Jane Austen. So first of all, there was no reason to even set this in, like, World War II time frame. Like, this didn't have to be historical at all. It could have been set at any point in time, because there's nothing indicating when this time period is. Like, the only reason you know it takes place around World War II is because, one, the author dates things, and two, she'll make references to World War II. Aside from that, just like the day-to-day life interactions, there's no descriptions of what they're doing or how they're doing them. There's very little descriptions of clothing. So like there's really just no way to tell what the time period is, except she tells you what it is. My other issue here was that there was like no character development at all. At all. I read at the end, in like the author's note or whatever, that her intent was to show traumatized people being brought together by Jane Austen, but I had no idea that's what she was doing until I read that, because there was like one character where I was like, oh yeah, that she's traumatized. The rest of them, there was just so little development that I had no idea how they felt, what they were going through. There would be like brief mentions of things that had happened that were difficult in their life, but nothing nothing really concrete. And I was like, okay. And so it wasn't until like reflection after reading that I was like, yeah, okay, I guess they were all traumatized. But I had no idea this was happening because I didn't have any idea of who these characters were and what made them tick. The last major gripe I have with this book is the lip service paid to diversity by shoehorning in a gay couple at the end. They were, of course, the two least developed characters, which is saying something since none of the characters were developed. And, like, you never really followed them together as a couple. I didn't even realize until the epilogue that they were supposed to be getting together. Like, that's how bad it was. Like, if you're not going to do diversity well, don't even bother. Because all you're doing is making it a joke. Like, whatever. I'm not going to get into it right now. I did not enjoy my time with this. And part of it could be that I'm not a super big fan of Jane Austen, but I think a lot of it was just the writing was lacking. Okay, let's get into mystery thrillers now. There's only three of them. And I suppose we'll start with Girl A by Abigail Dean. This is one of the most depressing books I've ever read. I think I only ended up giving it 3 stars, and I don't totally remember why at this point. Oh yeah, I do. It was because I called the twist ending, like, really early on. Oh god. Okay, so this is the story of this girl. She is referred to in police reports and media and everything else as Girl A because when she is a teenager, she escapes her abusive parents' household and manages to get help for her and her myriad of siblings. Like, I think in total there were like 7 or something. There was a lot of siblings. And then we're following her years later, and her mother has died in prison, and Girl A, as she is known, is trying to sort things out because she has to decide what to do with her mother's body, and then there's a little bit of money and the house in which she and her siblings were all imprisoned that has been left to them. So, I mean, the premise right there tells you how kind of dark and emotional this is going to be, and it does flip back and forth from her memories of her time in this abusive household to present day and the things she is doing with her life. Oh my god. It's horrifying. Obviously, major trigger warnings for child abuse. It's just, honestly, so, it was sad. And it was depressing. But I mean, it was a well-written book. It's always so hard to say because I'm not going to say I enjoyed my time with it. But, I mean, it was a decent reading experience. Next, we have something that was quite a disappointment to me, and that is The Wrong Family by Tarryn Fisher. I read The Wives by Tarryn Fisher last year, and it was one of my favorite books of the year. I was totally hooked. The twists were phenomenal. And, okay, I kind of, going into this, I was a little bit hesitant, just based on the subject matter, I guess. Now, there is a twist midway through that I didn't see coming that kind of threw me for a loop in a good way. I was like, oh, okay, that's intense. But then the rest of the book does this thing where they build you up to make you think that something insidious is really going on in the background, and then it just kind of falls flat. So that was disappointing. The basic premise is that this woman, she was a psychologist, and she is kind of a little bit obsessed with this family. Like, she thought they were the perfect family. It was mom, dad, kid. And then, after living with them, she realizes that's not the case and that something is wrong here. But I don't know. I gave it 3 stars, but the whole thing just kind of fell flat for me, and I was pretty disappointed. The last mystery thriller could also kind of be considered historical fiction, but it was in the mystery thriller category for the Goodreads Choice Awards, so that's why I put it in the mystery thriller category here. And that is The Devil in the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. I love this. Stuart Turton is just, he's an amazing author. He wrote The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, and I really enjoyed that, but I enjoyed this even more. And then he's really showing his range as an author here, too, because this is very different from The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. However, it has the same vibe to it, so if you liked that book, I think you'll like this one, too. This takes place on a ship, so we have, like, that isolationist thing going on. And we have this kind of like a Sherlock and Watson duo. There's a detective and his sidekick, who also kind of doubles as his bodyguard. Anyway, the detective is locked up. He is a captive. He is a prisoner. And so the mystery that's happening falls to his sidekick to solve. And then there's a lot of, is it supernatural? Is it not? I don't know. And then, like, the adventure was amazing. Like, it really had an adventurous feel to it, which is good because you're on a ship, I think in the 1600s. And at the same time, it felt fairly high stakes and just, like, edge of your seat thrilling. One thing that I really do want to point out, because I appreciated it, was the female characters were written so respectfully in this book. They were still 110% their own people, and there is an interesting relationship between this man's wife and his mistress that I've never quite seen done that way before, and I really appreciated it, because for once we didn't have the catty female relationships. They were just good, solid, dependable women who could take care of themselves. And I really, really appreciate that about this book. I don't know why I was so surprised by that aspect, because Stuart Turton dedicated this to, like, his 2-year-old daughter. So of course he would want to include role models for her, strong women who know how to get shit done. So I really, really, really enjoyed this, and I gave it 5 stars. And the last book to discuss is the literary fiction novel, and that is Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi. I won this as well in a Goodreads giveaway, which was pretty exciting. I had a really complicated relationship with this book, because while I was reading it, I didn't want to put it down, but then once I put it down, I had 0 interest in picking it back up, to the point where if I hadn't gotten an arc of it, I don't think I would have finished it. Anyway, this book is out now. It came out in January, so if you do decide you want it, it is available. The main storyline here is about a fraught relationship between a mother and a daughter. I believe they live in India, and it was interesting to me because I had a hard time understanding the interactions between the mother and the daughter. Partly because it was such a toxic relationship that I just couldn't understand why certain behaviors were still, like, made, why certain feelings were still had. But also I think there's a cultural difference in the parent-child relationship between India and the United States. And I don't know that for sure, I guess. But based on other things I've read and people that I've known, that does seem to be the case. So I think that kind of was a problem with the disconnect I felt from the characters. And the main woman, her name is Antara, were like in her head, but I never felt any kind of connection to her, and mostly I was just like, why does this woman have any friends? Why is she have a husband? Like, she was very, very unlikable to me. But I think part of that was because she was very stressed out. One, she's traumatized. Her past was not great. Her mother was terrible. She was not a responsible parent. When Antara was young, she up and left Antara's father and moved her to this ashram. And then that ended 4 years later, and they were begging on the streets for a while. At one point, Antara gets sent to this Catholic boarding school where she is abused horribly. It's just it's just a nightmare, and yet Antara still feels this sense of need to care for her mother when her mother starts forgetting things. And you're never, even at the end, I'm not quite sure if her mother is just faking the forgetting or if it really is something wrong with her. Like, it's very, very messy. It's a very messy relationship. But the story itself was fairly compelling, and if you do like to read about parent-child dynamics, especially ones where it maybe isn't the cleanest and nicest and smoothest, then this is probably a good book for you to pick up. It's not, I don't know, I felt like it should be emotional, but because of the disconnect I felt from the characters, I never felt emotionally attached. But, I mean, it was shortlisted for the 2020 Booker Prize, so, you know, it could just be a me thing. That, and I don't read literary fiction a ton, so that could be the problem, too. So, finally, we're done with my wrap-up. I need to either read less or get my shit together and start filming mid-month wrap-ups, because this is ridiculous. Anyway, if you've read any of these books, I would love to hear your thoughts about it in the comments below, or even if you would just like to read any of these books after hearing me talk about them, go ahead and let me know that as well. If you're new here and you like my content, subscribe. Stick around. I'd love to see you in my comments. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you soon. Bye.